said Stephanie with the eye on the end. Let's try this again from the top. Before Uncle Graham reads the recitation, the bridesmaids and the groomsmen walk up the aisles and take their places around the groom. She pointed at Brian Kerrigan. Then Uncle Graham reads, and when he finishes, the music starts, and the supporting cast, she indicated the bridesmaids with the theatrical flourish, follow the choreography to their positions so Valerie can come up the aisle. Okay? The men huddled around Brian nodded, stupefied by the hours of rehearsals and the pulsating hangovers. Valerie sighed, straightened her back, and the bridesmaids all prepared to soldier on. But in the last row of pews, 5-year-old Henry Kerrigan was suffering. He squirmed, he wriggled, and he fidgeted. The youngest member of the wedding party, he was a ring bearer. When Oliver, the best man, theatrically failed to produce the rings, Henry's job was to march down the aisle, carrying them on a red velvet pillow. No, 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 stop. Just stop. Stephanie put her fists on her hips, blew a lock of hair from her face. First, the smallest bridesmaid crosses the aisle, then the tallest groomsman goes the other way. Then the opposite, tallest and smallest, and then opposite again. She jabbed a finger at them and explained. Janet, Peter, Jennifer, Scott, Dinah, and Oliver. It is not rocket science, people. Again. Henry moaned. Not out of boredom, but because he had to pee worse than he ever had in his entire life. Hours earlier, during the first rehearsal of the ceremony, Henry had played his role to perfection. Hiding at the back of the church when he'd heard Oliver pat his coat, he'd stepped into the aisle and marched, slowly and proudly, to the front. When they did it 3 more times, he did it perfect every time. Stephanie had said so. He was such a clever big boy, and so good to have done it perfectly. She rewarded him with a 7-Up, a large one, and a bag of Cheetos. Then she told him to sit quietly and wait till the rehearsal was over. And because he was a good, clever big boy who wanted his brother to have a good wedding, he did just that. He gobbled up the Cheetos, but he savored that 7-Up. While the bridesmaids were giggling through their organization, he draped an elbow over the back of the pew, like his father, and sipped with style. While Stephanie repeated the order of the vows, he held the neck of the bottle with his thumb and 2 fingers, and he swigged like a man in a roadhouse. And finally, when the best man messed up the procession again, he tipped his head back and finished the 7-Up like it was the sweetest thing on earth. But now, an hour later, Henry was suffering. His bladder was full to bursting, to the point of pain. And there was no toilet in this old church, and there was no sign this rehearsal was ever going to end. All right, bridesmaids first, and here we go. Henry moaned. He moaned through gritted teeth, and Stephanie appeared in front of him. You know, I just cannot understand why anyone would be so selfish to interrupt Valerie's rehearsal for the most important day of her life. Do you know why anyone would be so selfish? Her face was hard, her makeup and now was smooth. I don't know. Then maybe you could try not to act like a little baby and spoil a lot of very hard work. Now shush! Then she smiled, stood up straight, and turned her back on him. Henry tried to catch his brother's eye, but his eyes were closed and his tired face was towards the ceiling. He was nothing more than an overfull bladder, a stretched, bloated skin cut around the middle with a too tight belt. Everyone else in the church, from the flower girl to the bride and groom, they were all exhausted and stunned, cowed by rehearsal. They were hardly aware of each other, much less the little boy in the back of the church. And the pressure in his body was making his eyes blurry and hot. His fear of disappointing his brother and his new aunt, his aunt-to-be, started to flare. And it was stoked by the fear of that hard-faced wedding planner. And on top of that was a new fear. A fear that he might actually wet his pants in front of everyone in a church. Jesus would see him wet his pants. There could not be anything worse. He squeezed his fist and closed his eyes and tried to hold back his panic. Then he heard a voice say, "Sorry, Steph." Henry opened his eyes and saw Oliver, his brother's weedy, bearded friend, lurching away from the altar. He coughed and leaned heavily on a pew. My polycryptodosis is flaring up. I've got to... He gagged and leaned heavily. He waved a hand at Henry. Come help me, little man. I've got medicine in my car. He stopped for another series of gagging breaths and plunged out of the main hall. Gratefully, Henry followed him outside, shifting his weight from foot to foot. After the dim interior of the church, the Santa Barbara sun was dazzling. Oliver raised a hand to his eyes, and Henry did the same. They could both see dark red spots glimmering over everything. Oliver closed the church door and said, "Oh, man, I was about to die in there." Henry looked at him, afraid of this new development. Oliver blinked, saw the tension on the boy's face, and laughed. It was a friendly sound. "No, not for real, little man. Don't worry. What about your pop? Henry struggled for the word. "My polydactylosis? I think that'll pass." Then Henry's desperate bladder made him groan. "What's wrong, little man?" Oh God, how can he say this word in front of his brother's friends? You can't say "we" or "tinkle" or a babyish word like that. What were the words a big boy would use? Finally he said, I gotta go." "Yeah, I figured from the pee-pee dance you've been doing. It's okay, me too. But there's no toilets here." Oliver looked around the parking lot. "And then we could go in that corner over there." He pointed next to a peach-colored Mercedes parked near the church wall. The vanity license plate on the car said, "Daymaker," with no E. Henry's mouth fell open. "It's in front of the church." "Well, I'm dying for a whiz, so if you're not going, stand lookout for me." And Oliver reached for his belt. Seeing this, Henry blurted, "No!" He didn't want to look like a baby, but the fear he'd wet himself came back. "I want to go in front of..." Oliver shrugged. "It's okay, I'm the same. Tell you what, you go first, I'll keep lookout. If anybody comes, I'll whistle." Then he gave a little two-tone peep. Henry bit his lip, looked back at the dim church, and realized the whole time he'd been scissoring his legs. He said, "Don't look!" and ran over to the car. He pushed himself between the bushes and the wall, trying to get completely out of sight. Fear of discovery fought with pleasure and pressured his bladder, and he could hear traffic nearby, but he was desperate. As he squirmed back, he scrabbled at his belt and hurriedly yanked his waistband down. And never in his short life had he felt such relief. Not when his mother let him quit soccer. Not when Miss Tucker canceled their year-end spelling test because she was sick. Never. This was relief that started at the pit of his abdomen, radiated out through his fingers, out through his toes, up his back, and over his scalp. When he finished, he pulled his pants up and stepped away from the puddle spreading across the ground. It was huge. How could he have contained so much liquid? I mean, the smell, he could still smell 7-Up. It was shocking. He shifted his feet, keeping his shoes clear, and started to feel a sense of pride. He looked away from the leading edge of the puddle, back to where it started. What little ants would have made of this flood? And then he realized it started not on the crumbling wall of the parking lot, but splashed on the wall of the church and the side of the Mercedes. Oh God, he peed on someone's car and he peed on a church. On the church his brother was getting married and where his auntie-to-be and her mother had said was the most beautiful church they could possibly find. A cold fear seeped into his fingers and his feet. "Hey," said a voice. It was Oliver. Don't come," said Henry, the threat of tears choking him. "Are you all right, little man? No rush, but I really could use a whiz." Henry walked around the peach-colored car and saw the building was labeled Church of Our Lady of Sorrows. He'd peed on a sad lady's church. Oliver saw his crumpled brows and his trembled lip, and he crouched down. "What's wrong, little man? You all right?" Henry nodded, biting back his shame. "Are you okay to keep lookout?" Henry nodded again. "Seriously, give me a signal if someone's coming, okay? I don't want everybody seeing my schlong." Henry had no idea what schlong meant, but he said yeah in a small voice. Oliver walked past, and Henry considered his fate. He was dead. His brother would probably call him a stupid diaper baby and beat him up and kill him. And Valerie, she'd be so mad she'd kill him too. He had no idea what Jesus would do. But he could only think of one thing possibly worse than peeing on a church, and that was so bad he couldn't even say it. The tears were welling up in his eyes when he heard somebody laugh. "Oh man," Oliver said, "you got the fender and the door handle." Henry looked over and saw the bearded face split with a grin. "What a job, little man." Oliver hadn't noticed him. He stared at the wet car, then gave a scratchy laugh and said, "Totally awesome. You can't be the only one to soak this pink turd mobile." Then he undid his fly. "How's this rocket science for you? Smallest to tallest, then opposite again. As he spoke, he swiveled his hips, sending a yellow, coffee-stinking arc back and forth across the door, spattering the window and splashing the handle. He finished and backed to the car. Oliver flinched. Whoa, hey, Henry, privacy, little man! They both turned away, and Oliver did up his flies. When it's done, he said to the boys back, "Good job, Hank." Henry frowned. It wasn't my fault. I didn't mean to get pee all over the church. He lowered his head. Oliver looked thoughtful. This was outside, yeah? Henry nodded. You didn't get any inside the church? No. So it won't hurt anybody. And no one else needs to know. Henry felt lighter for a moment, but then he remembered Sunday school and how Jesus could see everything in your heart, and his face crumpled again. Oliver seemed to follow his train of thought and said, "Hey, come on, Hank. You know what they say about Jesus, right?" And he did pronounce it, Jesus. That guy, he's all about forgiveness. But I know what I did. Oliver thought for a second. And he said, I got pee all over that car. Oliver laughed. Yeah, that was excellent! Henry looked at him, trying to understand. Okay, you know how they say what goes around comes around? Henry nodded. Sometimes, Hank, life is kind of unfair. And then the wheel of karma needs a little push to get it going. Oliver grinned approval at him. Today, you totally rebalanced the scales of justice. Henry blinked at it, feeling relief and something almost like pride down inside. Trust me, little man. Oliver smiled again and looked to the church. There's probably a limit to how long we can take for a pterodactylosis break. Inside the church entrance, they waited for their eyes to readjust to the gloom. Oliver took a box of Tic Tacs from his pockets. You want? Henry stopped him and led him to the font. You're supposed to wash your hands first. Oliver looked down and gave it to a smile. Good call. Cleanliness is next to godliness, right? Henry didn't know why, but they were both laughing as they dipped their fingers in the water.